What is
Okay.
a tantrum?
So a tantrum is, and again, let's not, I want to play with that language. What people think a tantrum is something that is inappropriate, disrespectful, dramatic, oversensitive. And really all that's happening in that moment is a kid is releasing their frustration, their sadness, their embarrassment. They are, acknowledging their feelings. And a lot of times, especially with a 6-year-old, because we're talking about a 6-year-old, it's just their way of communicating, and they don't have the ability to regulate all of those emotions yet. Not because you've failed as a parent, but because their brain hasn't developed in such a way yet. So the word tantrum, it's really not a problem to use that word, but I feel like in our
There's
minds,
a stigma against it.
We'll say, are you going to throw a tantrum? Like there's a bratty component to it.
So I think even as parents, I think you're right. I think the idea of us relabeling it may give it different energy.
So I would call it communication. I would call it releasing of emotion. I would call it an opportunity to slow down and stop what you're doing. Like parents who a kid starts kind of falling apart and they start kicking on the floor, and that's when the parent decides to start yelling. You're just exacerbating it. Like they're already reached their limit.
Yeah, they're in the reptilian part of their brain, and it's a 6-year-old, so the 6-year-old doesn't have a prefrontal cortex developed.
It's developing.
Yeah.
It's developing. It's there. I mean, they can rationalize a little bit, but not the way an 8-year-old, 9-year-old, 10-year-old, or an adult can. So they're just basically saying, picture them like like all of us human beings is like a cup, and during the day, we fill up with more stuff. And sometimes we get the opportunity to release some through crying or laughing. So we're just kind of always filling up. A tantrum is when that kid's cup is so full that they literally can't do it anymore. Whatever that is, they may not be able to listen to you anymore. They may not be able to walk through the store. They may not be able to take the next, direction from the teacher, whatever it may be. They are basically saying, I am full. So you can understand why the goal is then to slow down, not to speed up, and to stop and allow them to, that's the opportunity where if they'll let you rub their back or hold their hand, sometimes they don't. And that doesn't mean they don't love you. It just means even touching is too much. Mm-hmm. But if they let you, what you're trying to do is help them calm their nervous system down. You want to help them regulate. And there is a teaching component, but I'd worry less about I'm teaching them something and more about how to help them get back to, a state of mind where they don't feel the need to kick, scream, yell. Mm-hmm. And instead of worrying about when will this happen again, it's more about how do I get back to help them get to an equilibrium.
Second question.
Okay.
How normal is it for a 6-year-old to have a tantrum?
Very normal. It's so normal. And and again, for your friend who's writing this, I remember, I'm thinking of Skylar just probably because she's our youngest and it's more, on my mind. But when she was around that age, 5, 6, 7, do you remember when she would like sit there and I could see her eyes like welling up? Mm-hmm. And I would say, do you need to get your sads out?
Yeah.
And she would say, yes. And then she would just cry and like move around. And sometimes we'd hold her and sometimes she just kind of roll on the floor. And so I tried to like not frame it as, are you about to fall apart? Mm-hmm. I tried to recognize that she was starting to lose her capability. I always picture her with like waffles or something.
Right.
Like there was always these times in the morning.
A lot of waffles, a lot of syrup.
A lot of stickiness.
Yes.
And I would just say, oh, you just need to get your sads out. I get it. Let's go do it. And so just think about how much that language changes the way you view that moment. Because then when they're done, you can be like, wow, good for you.
Next question. How do you support a 6-year-old? Do you support a 6-year-old's fear without being pushy or passive?
Do you have an example for me?
No, I don't. How do you support a 6-year-old's fear without being pushy or passive? I don't know where he was going with that.
Maybe he's saying, how do you acknowledge or validate fear and then not try and talk him out of it?
Yeah, I think that's what he's asking.
Yeah. I mean, when kids are afraid, yeah. You know why? Because they haven't done the things we've done, because they've had an experience, maybe 1 or 2 that have led them to believe that every experience will be like that again. You've got to remember they have a different brain. They don't have as much information.
Mhm.
They don't have as much experience. They don't have a rational thinking mind that's well, formed. And of course they're going to be afraid. Like, I was just talking to my oldest daughter or my youngest daughter about, going to Six Flags. And she went on all these roller coasters. And while she was telling me about it, she's like, yeah. And then this one I went on, I had been on it a bunch of times, but then I was scared this time when I went on it. But when I went down, here's what I did. And then I decided to not go on this one and she's even acknowledging when she's afraid. And then some, and even if she's done it before, she's still afraid. And even though I'm talking about roller coasters, isn't life a roller coaster? Like, sometimes they're afraid to go to school. Sometimes they're not. Sometimes they're afraid to ask someone to be their friend. Sometimes they're not. So you can acknowledge their fear every single time. Acknowledging and validating their fear is not reinforcing their fear.
What about a 6-year-old who has verbalized thoughts like, I'm a bad daughter? She hits herself sometimes. It's scary. Some language she uses that does not come from us. She talks about herself and we have no idea where she's picked that up.
Right. Well, and she's probably not using language that anyone, nobody is saying to her, you're a bad daughter, but there's a message that she has that there are actually good or bad people, or that good or bad emotions, or that she either gets more love when she's a certain way and less love when she's another way. And this isn't about your buddy. Like, this is human behavior.
Yeah.
This happens in every family. So acknowledging that and recognizing that it's all about, first of all, the language of choices. You always have to say to kids, it's not about you're a good or bad person. It's that there's good and not as great choices. You don't even have to use the word bad. You can be like, this was a good choice. This choice wasn't so great. So then you start to recognize that they are all of the things.
Mhm.
Sometimes they make good choices. Sometimes they make poor choices. And we all do. It's not about them as a person. It is about this experience. Because I think, parents are they feel the need to tell their kids they did something bad or that they're bad because they want to drive a sense of you should feel guilty about this.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, if you say to them, you are bad, that doesn't drive guilt, that drives shame. That creates an internal sense of, I am not a worthy human being.
Yeah.
So you want to differentiate and kind of, focus on all their parts.
Yeah.
And I would also say that there is something, and it may not even be from parents. It could be something she learned, an experience she had in school or an experience she had with a friend where she feels like for some reason, she doesn't feel up to par for whatever reason. And having conversations with her when she's okay about that, like when I say when she's okay, like before bed, when she's really lovey or when she's feeling good or you're in the car together, saying, hey, you don't even have to you could ask her some questions, but say, sometimes when you're really upset, when you're getting your sads out, you say things like, I'm not a good person, and say, I just want you to know you're one of the best people I know.
Mhm.
And that I understand when you have a lot of feelings, that's how it feels. But I want you to remember that I think you're amazing and that you are worthy of respect and love, and, however your kid would receive it.
Well, and what I would add to everything you're saying, which is all really good, and this may be obvious, but I'll say it anyways. Don't try to teach anything when the kid's melting down.
Yeah.
Bad idea. Their brain shut off. You're not going to get anywhere. You're just
Right.
going to frustrate yourself. And then secondly,
But you can focus on soothing.
You could soothe.
You're not teaching with
Right.
words, you're soothing.
Right. And I think we used to put our kids in cranial sacral positions where we put their hand on the back of their head.
Yeah. Help them calm down their nervous system.
And how you hold them has certain energy points, and we're not going to get to it today.
Well, I can do a really quick one. If you can if they allow you to hug them and you can put one hand on the back of their neck, and this is really gentle, and then one hand on their sacrum, which is much lower, like at the bottom of the spine, there's something about, there's 2 pulses there. And if you can feel, if your hands are real sensitive, you can feel the pulse. And the goal is to help them calm down where the pulses start to pulse together.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is very Reiki, and you don't have to be able to feel that. Just know that your intention, it's all about intention.
Well, and I'll tell you, dude, it actually works.
Oh yeah.
At least it gave us some results. Like, there is something to where you put pressure, not even pressure.
It's not even pressure, right? Light
touch on the body. And then the other thing is, this is all a big fat test to see how you can be chill when your kid's melting down.
Right.
So this is all an internal thing. And I appreciate my friend asking me questions on, what do I do? What you need to do is be self-aware and try to be we've all been there, right?
Oh,
Our kids,
every single one of us.
our kids have melted down. Our kids have had tantrums, and it's super hard to be chill in the middle of a tantrum / meltdown.
And that's why while you're listening to this podcast, your friend and everybody else is really start analyzing that our fears around these things. What does a tantrum mean? Is a tantrum bad? Does this mean my kid is going to have problems forever? Is my kid going to tantrum their way through, kindergarten and first grade? Try to really deflate take some of the air out of that balloon, because again, a tantrum or the releasing of emotion is just communication. They're just letting you know, I'm overwhelmed, and their ability to release that versus stifle that is more healthy in the long run.
Well, and be cautious on comparing yourself or other kids.
Yeah.
Because we were at a father-daughter camp, and that's where I hung with my buddy, and he's probably looking at other 6-year-olds that are not melting down
in that moment. They might melt down
thinking, what's wrong with my kid? And like, be super cautious of the comparison of one daughter versus another girl that you see, or even yourself versus another dad that you see, because comparison through that lens is probably not the best idea.